Chapter 18. Lucas folded up the map that Stephanie had drawn for him and stuffed it into his pocket. The map that only moments ago had seemed fantastic now had an area of huge concern. While Lucas was not worried about the abilities of his friends to escape or to go into combat against Row 82 and his band of stunner-handed augment guards, there was a dome that was on the map that he realized would impact the strategy of both sides. Stephanie had labeled one of the domes Slave Holding, with a note below that her mother, Natalie Mason, was there. While it was in the general interest of slavers to protect the people they considered property from being able to produce, the loss of a few slaves was easy to absorb. In fact, some deaths among slaves helped maintain the culture of terror that inspired even the weak, sick, and very young to work without complaint. Kappa 16 undoubtedly knew with whom he was dealing, and he had most likely been watching everything that had happened. Lucas knew the odds indicated that he was aware of Stephanie Mason's involvement, and that he was arranging leverage in the form of a hostage situation. Lucas shuddered slightly as he hurried out the hallway. Lucas pulled out his short-barreled 12-gauge shotgun and fired a round into a guard turning the corner. Pumping quickly, he pointed to the end around the corner and began rushing toward the slave quarters. He recognized the footsteps of his friends behind him, so he continued looking up and around as he rushed ahead. His mind again returned to strategy. He had hoped to mount a quick strike and force Kappa 16 to defend his own position, allowing the others to lead the slaves to safety. Of course, the strategy would be lost if Stephanie's mother were brought at gunpoint, because Sig, Daniel, Victor, Jonathan, and even Lizard would most likely surrender immediately in a hostage situation. Following a surrender, the hostage and all of Lucas's friends would be executed. Survival of the fittest was the religion of the augments, and showing restraint in a hostage situation would definitely be considered unfit. Lucas thought that perhaps Kirana would grit her teeth and continue offensive efforts even in a hostage situation, but that could cause problems with the others. Lucas was uncertain about Jennifer. Ever since her arrival, she was the one member of the group that seemed unreadable. Of course, he expected that in a hostage situation where Stephanie's mother was hostage, she would most likely surrender in the hopes of preserving her mother, although she had shown remarkable will and courage by helping Jennifer and Daniel escape. Perhaps she was aware of the potential consequences. Lucas shook his head, deciding that could not be the case, otherwise she would not have labeled her mother's location on the map. Lucas could hardly blame her. He knew that in a hostage situation, he would probably surrender himself when it came to it. He hated hostage situations. He hated that people existed that would stoop to the level of leveraging innocence. He hated the pain and fear that paralyzed the hearts and bodies of those who were being leveraged. He hated that the likely outcome of these situations usually resulted in the leveraging side killing everyone anyway. Perhaps the reason he hated it most was because he himself had been a hostage. He recalled the terror of that night. He had been playing ball with his friend Joey inside the walls of their compound. Though they were in the temperate zone and the heat and cold were not fatal, there was a constant threat of attack. His parents made him recite his responsibilities for every type of alert that could be announced in their compound. He always thought it was a nuisance, since the responsibility for every type of alert was to go home and take cover. He recited it every day because his parents would not let him go outside if he did not repeat it correctly. Code Red, go home and take cover, he had said. Code Orange, go home and take cover. Code White, go home and take cover. Code Blue, go home and take cover. Code Yellow, go home and take cover. One day, his mother had surprised him with a new request. "What if you can't get home?" asked his mother. Lucas had thought about the question carefully. "I guess that would only happen if our home was destroyed," Lucas had answered. "I guess I'd find some other place to take cover." His mother had smiled with satisfaction. "You're a smart boy," she had told him. It had seemed patronizing, and he had disliked his mother's choice of words. "May I be excused?" he asked in an impatient tone. His mother had sighed and nodded. Seeing her response had caused him to sprint out the door and find Joey, who was already carrying a stained and misshaped red rubber ball. The day had been normal, with the average 2 alarms being raised, forcing Lucas to rush home and take cover. The sound of explosions outside accompanied the shaking of the earth and the rattling of objects in the cupboards and drawers inside his home. The table in their small home was made of thick steel and had been bolted down to ensure safe cover. After hearing the all-clear signal, the children rushed back outside. Eventually, the sun fell down against the horizon, and the shadow of the walls of their compound covered the earth. The moons appeared in the sky, lighting the red ball as the children continued to kick and catch it. The imperfect shape added a random element to their game, and all the children would laugh when it would spin or bounce in an unexpected direction. Lucas had become quite good at predicting what it would do, and had won the respect of many of the other children. Joey's father had turned on the internal floodlights so they could more clearly see their surroundings. Lucas liked Joey's father, and could not recall a time when he was not smiling, except, of course, when the attack came later that night. Machine gun turrets blasted hundreds of rounds toward targets outside the walls as the alarms began to sound. The children rushed toward their homes. Lucas remembered sprinting toward his home. The door had come into his view when it was suddenly obstructed by a man in a dark cloak. Lucas had gasped and tried to run away, but the cloaked man grabbed him. His screams had not been audible because of the explosions and gunfire that echoed around the concrete walls, and the flailing of his small arms and legs was insignificant next to the firm grip of the large demon worshipper that picked him up. Lucas turned up to look at his captor. His face was nearly entirely covered with a tattoo that depicted a large eye with a vertical slit. There was a small black key on a chain about his neck. Lucas had guessed, based on these things, that the demonic ability their attackers possessed was some form of enhanced sight. He stopped his screaming. "What does your key help you see?" asked Lucas. The demon worshipper was shocked by the sudden calm, clear question that Lucas had posed. Finally he smiled, revealing a mouth full of cosmetically sharpened teeth. "Everything," the demon worshipper had said. Even at 8 years old, Lucas had been skeptical of the claim that he could see everything. Lucas guessed that they probably had the ability to see things others could not, and that they exploited weaknesses to invade and plunder compounds such as his. Before long, Lucas was thrown into a room inside the compound with several other children, including his friend Joey. The door slammed behind him, but even in the low light inside, Lucas could tell that Joey had tears running down his cheeks, as did most of the other children. The smell of urine filled the small concrete room. It had been obvious that most of the children were terrified. They had good reason to be frightened, as demon worshippers loved to kill children. Lucas tried to comfort Joey, but his body was shaking in sync with his sobbing, and Lucas did not know what to do. It took several minutes for the gunfire to fade. Suddenly the door opened, and light from the floodlights outside poured into the room. A demon worshipper grabbed a little girl and yanked her out, then slammed the door behind them. The sound of sobbing in the room subsided for a moment, as everyone was curious to learn the fate of the girl that had been dragged out. The children all instinctively seemed to know that they would probably be subject to the same fate. The muffled sound of a male voice could be heard through the door, but Lucas had not been able to understand any of the words. Suddenly there was a thud, followed by the screaming of adults. The children in the room immediately began sobbing again, preventing Lucas from hearing more. He did not have to hear more to know what happened, though. She had been killed as an example. The children had become hostages. It had seemed to take hours before anything else had happened. He had made his way to the door and pressed his ear against it, straining to get a clue as to what was going on. There were occasional shouts and thuds, but nothing that painted a clear picture. Lucas was getting frustrated, and he began to look around for something that he could use to escape, to keep his mind occupied. His search was interrupted by the opening of the door. A demon worshipper rushed in and came right for Joey. Lucas rushed at him and kicked the demon worshipper's shins as hard as he could, but it only earned him a swift backhand that threw him into a huddling group of children. He struggled to get back up, but he felt dizzy and fell down. "Joey!" he had screamed. The door slammed shut, and Lucas crawled across the floor to press his ear to the door. The muffled sound of screaming echoed through the thick wood. He could also hear a woman shouting the word "no" repeatedly. Obviously his parents had been pleading with demon worshippers to spare the life of their son. Lucas pounded on the door angrily, even though he knew it would do as much good as the pleading of Joey's parents. It was only a few seconds before the sound of adults screaming could be heard outside the door. Tears ran down Lucas's face as he slumped to the ground. He wanted to do what he had been trained to do. He wanted to run home and hide under the thick protective shield off of which he had eaten his daily meals. He wished he could have known, and that they could have been faster. Of course, none of his wishing helped the situation. As time passed, several of the children began crying for water. They were dehydrated, and several began to vomit from the stressful conditions. Lucas had become angrier with every passing minute. He clenched his teeth in fury, determined to do something to fight these demon worshippers. It was another hour before the door swung open and the light from outside flooded into the small concrete room. Lucas stood up, determined that he would not let any of the other children go before him. He rushed at the demon worshipper in the doorway. "Anxious, are we?" laughed the demon worshipper as he lifted Lucas off of the ground. Lucas lunged with his face at the demon worshipper and sunk his teeth into his captor's cheek. The demon worshipper staggered back in shock as Lucas began shaking his head like an angry bulldog tearing flesh from its victim. The demon worshipper pinched Lucas's cheeks together, hoping to loosen his bite. "Stupid kid!" shouted the demon worshipper. The other demon worshippers snickered at the misfortune of their comrade as he slowly pried Lucas's face away and slapped him. "Lucas!" his mother had shouted. He looked out and saw his parents down on their knees with their hands bound behind their backs. "Mom! Dad!" he had shouted. "Touching," said the demon worshipper as he kicked Lucas in the back, throwing him to the ground. "Please don't hurt him," cried his mother as tears poured down her cheeks. His father was also crying, but trying hard not to show emotion. "We'll give you what you want." "You will give us what we want anyway," laughed the demon worshipper. He nodded to another demon worshipper who came up behind his mother and stabbed her. "Mom!" screamed Lucas. "Heather!" screamed Lucas's father. Lucas screamed as his father was immediately stabbed by the same blade that had impaled his mother. "Dad!" screamed Lucas. "Normally we would have your parents watch you die before killing them," said the demon worshipper, "but your biting antics have reversed the roles. So congratulations." The other demon worshippers laughed as he walked up to Lucas. Suddenly, a loud shot rang out and everything became deathly silent. The demon worshipper that had been approaching Lucas suddenly collapsed to the ground, and blood oozed out of his back. "Where did that shot come from?" shouted one of the others as they ran next to his corpse and tried to look around. Another loud gunshot echoed through the complex as he slumped to the ground next to his comrades. "They've got a sniper," said another as he held a black key and looked away. "Let's kill the kids and run." Lucas barely had time to register what was happening when he heard the clanking sound of a grenade go into the room with the other children. "Stop!" screamed Lucas. Of course it had been too late. The blast from the grenade blew the door off, and it slid across the ground until it landed in front of Lucas. The demon worshippers ran quickly, trying to escape the side of the sniper. Several more of them fell, but the largest of them rushed out untouched. Lucas began sprinting toward his house instinctively. As he ran, the sound of gunfire echoed from all around the compound. Lucas wondered if seeing the hostages all die had changed the tide in the battle. Of course, he would later find out that the adults had been crammed into a concrete room on the other side and were being brought out to face their children. The confusion had caused a grenade to kill everyone in that room as well. "Go home and take cover," whispered Lucas to himself instinctively as he sprinted toward his door. Although his parents had been taken from him, he felt surprisingly calm. As Lucas entered his home, he looked toward the sturdy table under which he had been expected to take cover during attacks. He turned the other way and noticed his father's 12-gauge shotgun. It took him less than a second to make his choice. He grabbed the gun. He rushed into his parents' room and grabbed his emergency pack and then stuffed several handfuls of shotgun shells into its pockets. He then loaded the gun, strapped on his pack, and ran outside. There were still a few demon worshippers trying to sneak by the sniper fire. Lucas quietly snuck up toward them, and when he was in range, he fired at them, killing them instantly. He pumped quickly and turned around defensively. After several minutes sweeping through the town, he came across a large man with a wide smile, accompanied by an old man and a young girl in a long white coat. "Absolutely unforgivable," said the old man. "These demon worshippers have no understanding of the importance of life. They murdered without thought or mercy or purpose." "Hopefully they didn't get everyone," said the large man. "Hey, kid," shouted the girl in the white cloak as she looked in Lucas's direction. "He made it! He made it!" exclaimed the large man with a wide smile. The old man rushed over to him. "Are you all right, young man?" asked the old man. "I'm Daniel Young, and I'm a doctor." I started Lucas. He was so tired and angry and dehydrated and sad that he did not know how to respond. "It's okay," said Daniel. "Sig got the demon worshippers that were trying to kill you, and the ones that Sig missed, Kirana here took care of." He did not know if he felt any happier, but this news did help him feel more relaxed. He slumped down onto the ground and lowered his head. Sig handed him a canteen filled with water. "You weren't like the others," said Sig with a smile. "They had already given up before we could get our rifle set up." Lucas knew the others to whom he was referring were Joey and his parents. Lucas took a drink. "So, kid," said Sig, "what's your name? I hate calling you kid." "Lucas," he replied. "Lucas Flynn." "All right, Lucas," said Sig with a wide smile. "Have you ever heard of a set of ancient tools called the Divine Keys?" The sound of a stunner humming took Lucas out of his memory and back into his present circumstances. He jumped around the corner in Kappa 16's plantation and fired his shotgun at a guard. Quickly running, he moved down the hall and returned to his memories. Hostage situations were almost always no-win scenarios. He was extremely fortunate to have met Sig and the others, and he was determined that they would not be put in that situation if he could avoid it. He turned to find a large metal hatch on the side of the hallway. He knew that this was the location of the slaves. With any luck, they were still present and could be protected before they were used as hostages. "In here," shouted Lucas, as Lizard, Sig, Daniel, and Stephanie joined him. "What's to stop them from sealing this hatch and using it as a prison?" asked Lizard with air quotes. "This," said Lucas, as he pulled a strip of exploding clay from his pack and pressed it on the hinges of the door. "Good thinking, Lucas," said Sig with a wide smile. Lucas smiled back as they opened the hatch and ran inside. Lucas turned and fired a pistol at the clay, blowing the hatch into the metal grate floor in the hallways outside the slave dome. "Stephanie?" came the voice of a woman from behind them. Stephanie rushed up and hugged the woman, then began making a series of hand signs. Lucas smiled. "We made it," said Lucas. His voice was full of relief. "It's Natalie Mason, her mother."